Wakey, wakey, frosted flaky. Hey, brought you a special present. Come on. Story time, chicken nugget. Rise and shine, here we go. Clear eyes, full hearts, can't lose. Welcome back.
What's going on? Wait a minute. Where am I? Who dressed me?
I did. I'm a big fan of bears.
I'm not wearing pants.
When's the last time you saw a bear wearing pants?
What the f-
Easy now, hey. The only F-bomb we're using around here is Fred Savage. Now, I want you to take a deep breath and listen to me very carefully, Frederick. You're in a PG-13 version of Deadpool 2, which means we only get 2 one and a glass of white wine.
Are you bleeping yourself?
You bet your voice and little I am.
That seems weird that you would do that yourself. Please stop that.
Sorry.
Did you reconstruct the bedroom set from The Princess Bride?
Inconceivable!
Oh, God.
Yeah, I always wanted to say that. Felt real good.
Why am I here?
Well, the reason that you're voluntarily here is that so I could read you the story of Deadpool 2, filtered through the prism of childlike innocence.
I'm a grown
And nobody
man.
does childlike innocence like you, Fred. Nobody. I need you almost as much as you need me.
I don't need you at
You
all.
need me to untie you once we're done. Hey, easy, sugar mouth. This thing will go all day, all right? Lithium-ion batteries. Hey, you are gonna love this story. I promise you. It's got fencing, fighting, revenge, giants, monsters, true love, and miracles. Now, once upon a time.
Welcome to the Superhero Cinephiles podcast. I'm your host, Perry Constantine, and welcoming him back once again is Will Short. Will, how you doing today?
I'm doing great. I've never seen this movie. This is the first time we're doing something where I'm just brand new to even the character almost.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so
exciting.
this goes back to people who watched your first appearance, listened to your first appearance when you came out to talk about Justice League of America.
Yes.
We were talking about that, and in it I had mentioned that we were talking about like superhero parodies, and I mentioned that, you know, the Deadpool movies are kind of a good example of parody, and you had said that you'd never seen them. So then I thought, oh, okay, well, let's and then I thought to spring it on you at that time. So right on the air, I kind of forced you into it to commit to watching Once Upon a Deadpool, which is also an interesting choice because it's not the first Deadpool movie. It's technically not the second Deadpool. It technically is, and it isn't the second Deadpool movie because it's a re-edit of the second movie with it's re-edited to be PG-13 and interspersed with these scenes of Deadpool kidnapping Fred Savage and reading the story of Deadpool 2 to him, you know, in reference to the Princess Bride. And because Derek and we had covered both the Deadpool movies on the show before, and I thought, and I was watching, I'm like, I wonder how much, and Derek had mentioned during when we had covered Deadpool 2, and I just re-listened to that episode, that if you'd showed just Deadpool 2 to someone without showing them Deadpool 1, they could follow it pretty well. So part of it was I kind of wanted to test that theory. Part of it I wanted to see like just how you'd react, just being thrust right into the deep end.
Yeah.
So it was part of it was also a little bit of, because you're not a Deadpool fan, so part of it was also revenge for making me watch Justice League of America.
Well, it was not nearly as malicious and vile as an attack on me as the JLA was on you, for sure. But yeah, it is an interesting first exposure to a thing. It's like seeing a TV edit of a famous movie is your first exposure to something almost, because, and yes, there's new content to it with the Fred Savage stuff. And then for a character and a franchise now that is known for ribald doesn't, you know, really begin to describe what's going on, that it is the PG-13 version, which still has plenty of shit in there. It is a funny exposure to it that I'm coming at it from, like, through 3 layers of distance, I guess. But yeah, I was real. And also I just said, you know what, I'm going to watch it. I watched it last night. I did like the minimal amount of research. I dive into stuff probably too much when I get into these things, but I was like, I'm just gonna look a little bit. I read one Deadpool comic, my very first one, I believe.
Which one was that?
The first of the Joe Kelly.
Oh, okay,
run
that's a good one. That's a
from
good
like
one, yeah.
'97, I guess, or '98, and I think that was the first Deadpool comic I'd ever read, and maybe the only like real appearance of Deadpool in a comic I've read. I've maybe seen him pop up for like a panel or two, but I don't know that I've ever seen him featured in a comic that I've read.
Okay, so that was actually gonna be my first question is like what, because I know you said you don't really have much exposure to him, but so I was gonna ask you what exposure to the character have you had before this?
And that, of course, reading him as a character, that's the experience. But you and I are around the same age, so I grew up like getting into the X-Men through the Jim Lee era and the cartoon, and that's the same era as Rob Liefeld's X-Force and and New Mutant run, which I like New Mutants as they were less than I liked them once Rob Liefeld got on the book. Yeah. But I even had like a reprint of the last New Mutants issue before they transitioned into X-Force. Like I was into that. So Deadpool was around and I was very aware of him. I only as a character I should know and think is cool. Like I was being told that he was cool. But that's also before he was given a lot of the development that I know came over time, more like how much he joked around, and the fourth wall breaking stuff. But I really just knew him as a 90s, like here's a great example of a 90s Marvel character.
Right,
All the great and not so great about that. And as I got into, that was around the time that I started to transition over to DC and get into Green Lantern and JLA and then later Vertigo stuff. So it was an easy side of Marvel to just make fun of and not even look into. And when people told me later, no, there's a great Deadpool run that, at some point I was like, okay, yeah, sure, whatever. And then clearly, regardless of what I think, he's a moneymaker for sure, and plenty of fans out there. But yeah, that was all my exposure, was very much impressions from afar.
Yeah, and you're not wrong to have those impressions of the character, because that's exactly what he was pretty much up until the Joe Kelly run. Well, I guess you could also make an argument for, because Fabian Nicieza did like a few limited series before that, which are pretty decent too. But it was really the Joe Kelly run that kind of cemented him as someone being able to hold his own as a character and actually kind of became a character. Because, you look at Deadpool's first appearances, it's, back when it was New Mutants, which Rob Liefeld basically turned it into a Teen Titans ripoff. And Deadpool was basically a Deathstroke ripoff. So much so that I'd seen this recent Twitter exchange where someone said like, if you did a color swap on Deathstroke and it'd basically be Deadpool, and Rob Liefeld's no, that's not at all true. And the guy proved it by doing a color swap.
He said, it's funny. It's one of those things. It's almost like a Trump thing where it's like, I don't know if you just truly believe your own BS all the time, or if you are, if you've drank your own Kool-Aid, or if you are adamantly trying to deny it because you just can't face up to these things that you did. Like the things, the way that you do things. Like if someone mentions feet to this guy, I swear he's gonna be like, it's the same thing as the small hands. It's like, no, I can draw feet, no problem. Like can't handle a joke about it. It's so funny.
Well, the weird thing too is it's so funny because do you ever see this Vanilla Ice clip from like back in the 80s where he's talking about Under Pressure, and he's like, no, we sampled it, but it's a different bass line. If you listen to it, it's like that. He's like, that's what theirs is like, and ours is like this. And you listen, you're like, that's the exact same fucking thing.
He gives it one, and he gives it one extra bass note. And what's so funny, what I love about that, it's funny because it's so easy to hate and love him in that moment, because you can see the look on his face. He knows he's pulling the wool over your eyes. Like, he's like, I'm a mischievous kid right now, and we got away with something, although he didn't. Ultimately, there was some litigation.
He eventually had to, like, pay for it,
Yeah, I mean, it's a sample. That's what it is. But, yeah, it is. That I can appreciate, because I'm like, okay, I know that you're conning me right now, and that's funny, and that's kind of charming. With Liefeld, I feel like, I mean, man, at least just seeing him online, it just seems like the guy just doesn't have a sense of humor about himself.
Yeah.
Which is one of the biggest crimes you can have, especially when you're kind of a purveyor of trash, which is less to even, like, I can see the appeal of his art. I clearly have critiques of it.
Yeah.
But if you could laugh at, like, isn't this crazy, the stuff that I draw? Isn't it extreme? Like, have you seen the Stan Lee the videos from the early 90s where Stan Lee is interviewing people like Todd McFarlane and Rob Liefeld for this video series?
Oh, no.
Okay, well, I won't go into all of it. It's definitely worth watching. It's really great and funny because Stan Lee is roasting these guys a bit, and like him and Rob Liefeld and Todd McFarlane team up and are like designing a character based off of a Stan Lee suggestion, like in the moment. And Rob Liefeld's suggestions, all the things he wants to do, there's just no self-awareness of like, yeah, you want to give him big shoulder pads. Yeah, you really want to do these pouches. Like he's just going down a list of Rob Liefeld, additives to the thing. And I'm like, I mean, I gotta appreciate that artists like him, Todd McFarlane, I have more respect for, but were tapped very much into a 13-year-old mindset that appealed to many, and I cannot take that away from them. It's laughable now, but the design of Deadpool, it is like, hey, let's kind of do Spider-Man. Hey, let's do Deathstroke. All that stuff. So there's that appeal. But yeah, Rob Liefeld, man,
the really funny thing about Rob Liefeld is he's made all these characters, and he takes all the credit for their popularity now, discounting the fact that they only became popular after he left.
That, like, I mean, because I at least amongst my friends that were into comics but didn't stick with comics, like they weren't in it for the boom of selling them, but it was like at that time in 1991 to 92 when even the kids who weren't reading Marvel Handbook or whatever were into that stuff. Deadpool and characters that were designed by these later image artists were just jumping off the page, and people just thought that they were the coolest thing ever. Cable included, all these things. And part of it was the attitude that even there wasn't really much character to them. It was just like their look, and they are all hard asses. That's really what was the appeal about them. And the appearance, the design is part of it. But yeah, I don't know. It's just like sometimes like Stan Lee trying to take a lot of credit for or all the credit for something, or for where it's like, I don't know, man, you kind of just added dialogue to maybe this one.
Well, the thing that kills me is when he tries to take credit for the X-Men stuff, when it's like, that was not you at all.
No, not at all. Yeah, absolutely not. And so it's but I do love to see how these characters that were popular, and Cable and Deadpool, who are both in the movie, I mean, it's like, a smorgasbord of those characters being reimagined in a way that is, in some ways, just like they were, specifically Shatterstar.
Exactly,
It's so funny to see, like, a truly Rob Liefeld accurate comic design on the screen. I wish we would seen that with Cable, at least for a minute, just like give us the super armored up giant, so many pouches version, just for even a shot, and then they edit it out or whatever. But it's funny to see all those characters, but I like how they've all managed to stick in the X-Men world in Marvel and get developed into something by writers over time and other truly better artists into. They're just part of the world. They're baked in now.
Right.
We found a way to make them work, which is something unique to comics, where it's like, well, we said it, now we have to live with it.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. And the Liefeld characters, like, Cable and Deadpool, definitely, Domino as well. Yeah. All these, like, they were just these one note, very paper thin characters when they were introduced. And then it was like, Fabian Nicieza on Deadpool. Jeff Loeb did a lot of work on Cable. Joe Casey, Robert Weinberg, and, Domino too. She had a bunch of good work done on her in the X-Force title. And then, even Shatterstar, like, I'm not sure if you ever read Peter David's second X Factor run. But
I did.
Yeah. I mean, he made Shatterstar into an interesting character. Like, if there's you ever want proof that the man knows how to that old axiom is like, there's no such thing as a bad character. There's only bad writers. I mean, Peter David proved that with Shatterstar.
Oh, totally. Yeah. I mean, he can, he that's a specialty of his, is like finding a way to make entertainment out of and enjoyable characters out of something that really probably in some cases was meant as a joke. He'll make that character into someone you care about and has a unique take on them. I love that stuff. Again, it's so comics to me, especially a Marvel thing where it's just like, here's a regrettable choice that we made to let this happen,
right?
Sometimes, and then that character becomes somebody's favorite, and someone takes them seriously, and they're appearing in comics 30 years later. Still. And in this case, in films that are making millions upon millions of dollars, and everyone knows who they are.
So, let's jump into it. How was your experience watching Once Upon a Deadpool?
So I didn't feel, I think you could, as far as the theory of you could watch this and really not be in the dark, again, I think being someone who's read a lot of comics and a lot of Marvel and been kept up with these things even from a distance when I'm not reading, I have a bit of a benefit, of being familiar. But I wasn't
just like through
really,
like the osmosis of being a comic book fan type of thing.
Exactly that, yeah. I didn't feel like way out of the loop. It was I kind of forgot that his main thing, Deadpool's main thing, is like, oh, he's a contract killer, is kind of his story generator as a way, like that's how he gets into trouble, and then we go from there. So once it started off, I was like, okay, well, so we're picking up at the end of the first movie, essentially, once we get past the framing device, and yeah, okay, he has a girlfriend, and that was the only part that felt like I had to really understand what came before, and then everything else was either just easy to understand in the moment or was a new thing. So I would say proven fact, you can get into this at very least as a out of touch comic fan with this stuff, which was good. I mean, and it's a pretty simple story overall as a compliment. I don't mean that as a problem.
Right.
It is kind of a series of set pieces. Like, I liked how fast it moved from one thing to another, and I of course, we're talking about a version that is an edit of what originally came out, so I don't know how quickly it moved, versus the original cut of the movie.
Mostly it's the same. Like, I'm surprised that pretty much all the major beats are still there. Obviously, like when I watch this, it's funny. I've seen this movie like twice now, and what I usually do when I watch this movie is I just kind of like skim through the Deadpool 2 stuff, and I just go straight to the Fred Savage scenes, because if I want to watch Deadpool 2, I'll go watch the extended cut of Deadpool 2. I'm not going to watch this. But one of the things I think it's kind of funny, because this movie was so obviously a cash grab, right? They release it at Christmas. They say, we're re-releasing Deadpool 2, and we're editing it down to PG-13, because Fox had always wanted to do Deadpool in PG-13, because they were like, with the first movie too, they're like, oh, we want this to be PG-13. It's all the other X-Men movies are PG-13. R-rated superhero movies don't sell very well. And it was, fans campaign, and Ryan Reynolds too, to his credit, they campaigned hard to make sure that it got an R rating. They even did one of the trailer spots of the first Deadpool movie, and again, like the marketing on these movies is brilliant. Oh, yeah. But they had this one where they had Ryan Reynolds talking with someone. I think it was like one of the guys from Saved by the Bell, who's like now an entertainment reporter or something.
Oh, Mario Lopez,
yeah. And they had Ryan Reynolds saying like, oh yeah, it's going to be PG-13 and everything. And then Deadpool appears behind him and shoots him in the back of the head. He's like, nope, it's going to be rated R.
Yeah, I remember seeing just over the years a lot of extra stuff that I'm like, I'm not even watching like live television, and I'm managing to see things where he's playing Deadpool, so he's all over. And it seems like they really, that's one thing that from afar I have liked seeing, is that here's somebody, Ryan Reynolds, who has really campaigned to bring this version of the character that is very much reflective of the character in the comics that people already liked to the public, and to try and stick to, I'm not the authority on accurate Deadpool-isms, but it seems that a very accurate reflection of the character. And I know that like lots of the supporting cast that we see are from the Joe Kelly comics and everything like that. So and to strike out for the R rating would be amongst those things, and it's only brought them success as a result. And so that is it's like a grassroots thing where it's like the fans now demand that, and if they aren't already, they are now. And so you've got like everybody's on board for this, and it's cool to see that come together, because often when an actor is that into it and trying to make things happen, it is maybe for an ego reason, or they're out of touch with what people would actually want. I will say it is interesting to read about how much I did a cursory look at like Ryan Reynolds had even more control over Deadpool 2 than Deadpool 1, and it is kind of interesting. I believe that the director from the first one was supposed to direct the second one,
right? Tim Miller,
and then left. at least reportedly partially because of the expanded role that Ryan Reynolds had on the second one. I don't mean to say that there's bad blood, just that he was not digging the direction that they were going in. So, I mean, I like Ryan Reynolds as a public figure. I always find him just kind of likable and seems like a normal guy, whatever that means. But I do think that he's not the only one influencing the comedy of the show, but he is clearly, I mean, he's a co-writer on the script.
Right. Yeah.
And as I understand it, was ad-libbing a ton on the show, because here's a character where for once they actually keep his mask on most of the time.
Yeah.
Unlike in Black Panther, these Marvel movies are like, you know, Iron Man, anytime he's going to have a one-to-one conversation, the faceplate comes up.
Right.
Because you paid for Robert
You
Downey
paid for
Jr.
Robert Downey Jr. Yeah.
You put him on screen. And it's funny because I always complain, but I also get it. Like, I know why, but it just feels like you're in the middle of a fight. Keep your fucking faceplate on. And
my favorite thing was with Chris Evans as Captain America, how every time they'd find some way for his mask to get pulled off during the fight.
Yeah, it's like, you know what, just use that, you know, that blue. I mean, basically they and the the second one, Winter Soldier, they kind of went with that blue, you know, with no mask look.
Right, yeah,
anyway, from the comics. That's a great look. Just do that at the end of the day. Don't even keep taking it off. But
yeah, and go ahead, pick up what you were saying again. You're talking about Ryan Reynolds, and
so he because the character has the full, you know, Spider-Man style full face mask, that of course he was doing acting on set. He was not just miming everything, but they were able to go back and ADR dialogue replace anything that they wanted to, really. That wasn't him, you know, on screen with his face showing, which in some ways is a boon. You can tweak stuff and you're like, hey, we don't have the joke quite there. You can punch it up later. But they were doing that quite a bit from what I was reading. And I think my main complaint, and I will say up top, I was always interested in this movie to see what happened next. I was invested in that way throughout. Funnily enough, the thing that I was just not really into was most of the humor, which is most of the movie, but somehow I was still interested. But there's an overcooked nature to a lot of jokes in it, especially from him, where it's more clever to me than funny. And some of that comes from delivery, because his delivery he's not very manic. I kind of appreciate the relaxedness of Deadpool, the character, sometimes, because you could do like a full Jim Carrey and kind of be too extra all the time. But I do wonder if some of that may come from the option of tooling jokes and dialogue down to the last minute.
I think a big part of it is just, and I said this when we talked about the other Deadpool movies, but this is basically who Ryan Reynolds is. Like, you take away the superpowers, you take away the whole assassin angle, like that personality, that's Ryan Reynolds. Like, he's always, you see him in interviews, you see him on Twitter, you see him in all these different things. Like, he is this guy. So this is just very natural for him.
Sure. Well, and that's the thing, is like, I think his performance in this, I think the performance is fine. It is really, I say that. I think there are times where the material is not being served by delivery, or vice versa. The delivery is great, but I just am not digging. It's like, it almost, even though the references aren't out of date, or if they are, it's on purpose. You know, like whatever the 80s music reference is, or this thing. It feels like comedy that I would have seen when Ryan Reynolds was new on the scene, or just a rising star, like in 2005.
Okay.
Like, I think the only movie that I've seen him in as a lead would be Waiting, and that would have been like,
that was a while ago.
Really early one for him. But it felt like that's a lot of what I was getting from its style wise. And so and the thing is, of course, I look at it, I'm like, well, a lot of people are digging this, so it's not a matter of quality, it's a matter of taste, I think, at the end of the day. Not a taste of like, well, good taste or bad taste, but just where you come from.
Personal taste.
And I think fourth wall stuff for me can work. It's not my favorite kind of comedy style, and there is more on display here than that, but there's a ton of that, and some of those do work for me. Especially there are a few times where, like Fred Savage specifically, when he reacts to Cable being in the movie and has this big Marvel fan info dump about, is he the son of Cyclops and Jean Grey or Madeline Pryor and all this stuff, like that was a funny moment. And I feel like I would hope that anyone could just find that funny, but there are times where it works for me, so it's not even an across the board thing. But some of it is everything feels pretty tossed off delivery wise. Like, And so it ends up feeling like I'm getting a list of jokes that people have worked on over time. The thing is, it's hard to critique like a dramatic arc or anything like that. And one, it's mostly a comedy. Two, it's a comedy or a movie that knows it's a movie, and he certainly knows it is. So it's
and
not
three,
really
it's also it's like half serious comedy, half parody of a superhero movie.
Exactly. And I think that there are things in there that I think overall, if I'm sitting there and looking at the intent and what they tried to pull off humor wise, my rating is clever, but not funny for me so much. There are times where I had some laugh out loud moments, but I was like, oh, that's smart. That's a smart observation.
Here's a question. I think because I feel kind of the same way watching this cut of it, and I wonder how much is that. Which did you feel was funnier? Did you feel the Fred Savage stuff was funnier, or the stuff that was actually part of Deadpool 2 proper?
I feel like, let me see, the Fred Savage stuff, when they're just having interactions at first, I was a little worried because I just didn't really, it felt canned, and it knew it was feeling canned, but I didn't think it was delivering on humor at first for me. And then when they got to play around a little bit more, again, when there's a moment that I did find funny where between them, where Fred Savage is making fun of the fact that they're with Fox.
Yeah.
And there's a reaction from Deadpool where he stops and goes, we are Marvel. And it felt like his character believed that. Not only is he offended, but like he's like, but no, we are as good as that. Like he's not even ready for this criticism. That was a funny moment for me. And they get into the whole Nickelback producing Beatles thing. That's another thing where I'm like, this is a funny observation, but this almost feels like it felt like material, not necessarily dialogue for me. But so I think overall.
Speaking of, did you see I told you about the Nickelback extended thing on YouTube?
No, I didn't see it.
There's an extended piece of it where where Deadpool just goes on this whole rant about how he's sick of all the Nickelback bashing.
Right.
And he just goes through like all of Nickelback's accolades. And then and Fred Savage is like, I'm sorry. I thought we were, riffing. And Deadpool's like all seriously hurt. And he's like,
right.
You were much nicer as a kid, Fred. And it just gets like really quiet. And then all of a sudden, Fred Savage just starts singing Nickelback.
Well, I'm going to bet that there was like true riffing going on set between them because what's funny because, the first time it came on, we were talking about this movie and I was talking about like, yeah, Fred Savage seems like a cool guy or whatever.
Yeah. And then right after that,
the week it got released, there's allegations and he's fired from the New Wonder Years for this shit. So I
remember when I was listening back to that episode, I'm like, oh, wow, this has not aged well.
Bad timing. But that's just how it is. But he's done a lot of comedy stuff. Like he directed a lot of Sunny in Philadelphia episodes, and has worked a lot in realms where it's like riffing and being funny on the spot.
And Deadpool even mentions, I love Modern Family, so I didn't know he was involved in that either.
So like there's I would bet that between those two guys, there's a lot of that they're working with on set. But those scenes were fine for me. There was some stuff in it. It's funny. They weren't in there a lot. I felt like they weren't featured that much as a framing device. It's like there's a few closer at the top, and then it kind of went away for a while.
Yeah, that was kind of. I was kind of surprised because I was kind of skipping around a little bit, and I'm just like, did I skip over some? Because it feels like I've been fast forwarding for a while now, and I think that's one of the biggest weaknesses is that. And I wonder how much of it was just like the pressures of Fox saying like, we have to keep this under a certain time limit. We have to keep the PG-13 rating. And I'm watching it. And I think like there's a misunderstanding by the Fox studio on what they had here. Whereas I think everybody who watched this movie, they didn't watch it because they wanted to see Deadpool 2 again. They didn't watch it because they wanted to see a PG-13 cut of Deadpool, right? Nobody went to see this movie because they objected to seeing an R-rated Deadpool 2, right? Everybody went to
kids can finally see it.
Exactly, yeah. Everybody went to this movie because they wanted to see the framing stuff. And I think when Fox kind of forgot about that at some point in the movie, and it shows, and it feels like they say, "Oh, well, this is the big stuff in the movie." So I'm like, "No, we're here for Fred Savage and Deadpool. We're not here for Deadpool 2."
Well, which is, it is to think of it from that perspective. Yeah, watching the movie, it's like, well, no, it's mostly the movie. All right, having not seen Deadpool 2, it's like there's a lot of movie here, and we're just kind of. I assumed we were just cutting to them when we needed to skip some things that they didn't want to show in a PG-13 film, which it's fun. Again, they get away with, I mean, they even go into the things that you can and can't do to some extent in a PG-13 movie. The unnecessary bleeping was a pretty funny gag, especially when he's talking about Matt Damon.
The Matt Damon
wanting
one
to fight him.
one, yeah.
Like, that's a funny one that goes on for a while that worked for me. But I was, and it's funny because as much as it's like, okay, a lot of those worked for me, because I was interested to see what happened next in the story, I was kind of like, okay, well, let's get back to the thing, because I haven't seen this movie before. So, like, show me what's going to happen with Rusty and all this stuff, because I kind of want to know what's going on. And I think, it's weird, because the comedy wasn't to my taste, but the action's pretty good.
The action's really good, yeah.
It's well pulled off. And I was like, what I found that I wanted was an X-Force movie, played mostly straight, where the action is the steak, and Deadpool and his comedy is the parsley on the plate, where he's there and he brings some of this business to it, but even just with the same filmmakers making a grittier, because I mean, I'll say this for sure, I was way more entertained and engaged with this than the last two official X-Men movies that came out.
Well, I mean, that's not hard.
Bar.
It's a very low bar. I mean, it's and but if you want to see this guy playing it straight, I mean, he directed Atomic Blonde. If you ever seen that movie,
I haven't, and people are involved with John Wick as well, right? On this,
yeah, he was an uncredited like director on John Wick. It says so. I think he was like probably like an assistant director or something. Yeah, but also, I didn't know this, but Hobbs and Shaw, the Fast and Furious one. I'm not sure if you saw that, but he directed that as well.
Yeah. Well, yeah, there's an action pedigree behind it, and it's like I'd read something about how the first director had wanted to go in a more stylized direction, and I just saw the Elvis movie, which I found very entertaining. It's Baz Luhrmann, and it's just like a phantasmagoria. It's just like you're overloaded for 2.5 hours. It's not about reality. It's about just bright colors and stuff, and I really loved it for that. And I was finding myself wishing that, as the action's well shot, but I was like, oh, maybe if this was like a more colorful world. And it has a frenetic, kinetic pace to it, but I was like, I kind of would like to see that if the way that it was shot was even more playful, or if the visuals were a little more engaging.
I wonder how much of that probably has to do with Fox, because like they're saying like this is technically still part of the X-Men universe. We want to keep it in that kind of milieu, and I think and even still, like Deadpool pushes it more than the X-Men movies do, because they have him in the costume for the whole time. They actually have Colossus, like they've got Colossus, and they show him as a big metal guy, whereas in the X-Men movies he only turns metal for 5 seconds at a time.
Well, I mean, and not to put anyone down, but I mean, the guy that they had cast as Colossus, it felt like there was a lot of casting choices of important characters that were made at the last minute with relatively no-name people. That are just, and Colossus being one of the most recognizable across multimedia, one of the best X-Men, let's say, like that, they just kind of put somebody that you could not pick out of a lineup or that you've never heard of before to say a few lines in one movie, and then they would have to live with that in the third movie. I mean, they recast so much. I don't know why they didn't just do that, but
but they got this guy who's doesn't even try a Russian accent or anything like that. Where that's what the guy's known for.
Yeah. Well, he looked fine as the character, but like, and they didn't write a real character for him. Certainly not in his first appearance, but
not in any of his appearances. Like even when he's supposed to be part of the main X-Men team in the third movie, he still doesn't say anything.
I rewatched those movies a few years ago, and I was just flabbergasted by how many. I mean, obviously, we live in a world now where it's like if a character appears on screen, they have a 10-year plan for that character in the MCU.
Right.
All these things have been tested and thought of, and et cetera. And sometimes that's not always the best thing. But they were so just by the seat of their pants throwing, hey, let's just throw Jubilee on there. Hey, let's do it again, and a different actor. Hey, let's throw Kitty Pryde in the background.
Let's also throw Jubilee in here 20 years before she's supposed to be born.
They are just throwing these things around just like, hey, wouldn't this, as though every movie is their last and also their first in some cases, where it's like, I don't know what I'm doing, just throw more mutants on the screen or whatever. But so Colossus was highly underserved in that, so it is really cool to see him here. Like one of the things that I saw from a distance when I saw these movies coming out, the Deadpool ones, I was like, oh well, at least in these previews, Colossus is there. That's cool and unexpected. And he looks pretty good.
Mm-hmm.
And I like the way that Cable looks. I like the way that they've styled Domino. I just like these character designs and the style of it overall. And so they do push it, I don't know, at times both more comics accurate, more towards the X-Men, you know, like leathery style, let's say for Domino, though she's kind of already there in the comics anyway, and into wackier places. And I end up liking the design for pretty much all the characters.
Right. Yeah.
For those reasons. Like Brolin does look great as Cable. That's a good choice. That's like an easy choice almost. You're like, yeah, of course he does. But that's what I ended up wanting. The more that the team came together, you know, with Colossus, once it got pared down to Domino and him and Colossus being the main group, I found myself wanting, like, oh, I just wish I was watching a good X-Men or an X-Men adjacent movie that had some extra pairs of balls on it, which was kind of what you get here. And that's, I think, where I was getting pulled back into it was, oh, we're going to have a thing where we have, and I liked the story of, this would have been, it would probably been garish at the time, but like, you know, when school shootings were first happening, it's not even that they were first happening, when they were starting to become a thing, I remember thinking at the time, there's got to be an X-Men, you know, story where you have a mutant teenager that has been bullied, that is having this reaction and is taking it out on the school because they don't know what to do. And seeing this version of Rusty Collins deal with a trauma, beyond bullying, abuse, in that way, I was like, oh, here it is. This is how a dangerous mutant is created, quote unquote. It is like if you caught Magneto early on, you know, that kind of thing. That was a cool thing to me. It was weird tonally, and the emotional scenes that they had together actually really worked for me. The character, that actor is great. I really enjoyed him in the Hunt for the Wilder People. Did you ever see that?
I didn't see that, but he was also in Godzilla versus Kong.
He was. The Hunt for the Wilder People is a New Zealand one, and I highly recommended. It's really heartwarming and very funny. But he's great in this, and I bought into their emotional relationship. And that's hard to do sometimes when, you know, you have a character like Deadpool who exists in and out of emotional reality.
Right.
But I also they have to attach the idea of sexual abuse to, and I'm not a prude. I'm not like I don't care. I mean, they can cover whatever. But it seemed like, you know, they made this whole thing about calling the guy who headed the Essex school a perv over and over again. And it seemed like they only threw that in with they wanted to throw in this heavy accusation, this heavy reality thing, without really looking at it, it doesn't have a place in this movie, so why throw that part on there? Weird.
They don't really, it's the same thing in the extended cut as well. Like, they don't really touch on that. Like, it's just they show him torturing Russell. Like, they have got that, and I think the torture scene goes on for a little bit longer in the extended cut, but but that's about it. Like, it just seems like it's something it's an accusation Deadpool's throwing out because they're a creepy school.
Right. And maybe part of it is just me taking for face value that everyone jumps on board with that and that no one denies it. You know, maybe I'm taking it to be like literal, whereas that wasn't the intent of the writers. But if I'm accurate, I'm like, man, let's just not even go there. If we're not going to get, I mean, maybe in a movie with this level of irreverence and it's mostly comedy and these things. But aside from that, I was really digging the idea of, here's a kid who's been through this, and not only do we have to stop him so that the soldier from the future doesn't kill him or whatever, but that there's just we need to heal this person. And so it's weird that was well done in a movie like this. But again, that, like, if you I was imagining and yearning for a type of like X-Force movie that was more on the serious side, and you're cutting out these other things, and that's what you're at, is basically, we have to save the soul of this child. But there was a lot of that in there, and that really was what I latched onto above all, I would say. And so that had me engaged. Doesn't really matter how you get me there. I was there.
I think too, what was interesting is that, and you haven't seen the first one, so you've got no frame of reference for this, but I feel like the story's a lot stronger in this one compared to the first one. And also, and it's interesting because the first one had, a dedicated supervillain character in that, right? It had a guy who is, basically a bastard. He's basically there to be a supervillain.
Yeah.
This one doesn't really have a villain. I thought that was a pretty cool way, because you've got, Cable ostensibly through most of the movie, but then the climax, it's all about Russell, but he's not really a villain. He's someone we just have to stop. And then you got the Juggernaut, but the Juggernaut's just there as, a henchman, more or less.
Yeah, he's a weapon almost at his side. Yeah, and then even the villain, the headmaster or whatever you want to call it, the guy that's in charge of the school, is barely in the movie, and the damage he has done has already occurred, and now he's actually the person you're, for better or worse, trying to save, just so that he doesn't go through that.
Until Dopinder runs him over with the car.
Well, right, yeah. Until that point, I was like, yeah, they're probably, especially with the accusations that they're throwing around, I don't think they're just going to let this guy, especially with when the shot changes to be wider and they're just showing him standing in the middle of dirt. I'm like, yeah, he's about to die. Like, I thought an anvil was going to drop on him or something, like Looney Tunes style. I just didn't know what, but then there was that. Essex is a reference to Mr. Sinister. Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay. But nothing else kind of popped up about Sinister in this.
No, that was just that. But yeah, in the comic books, he had Sinister ran an orphanage. Like, he ran the orphanage where Cyclops grew up. Yeah.
Right. Didn't Sinister show up like as a Easter egg or something at the end of one of the other X movies?
He showed up in a few. He showed up as an Easter egg in a few of them. So in the end of what was it? I think it was Apocalypse. There's a, because you have did you see Apocalypse?
Yeah.
Okay, so you remember, so you've got the thing with Wolverine in there with the whole Weapon X stuff, and then you see it at the end. There's someone who's walking away with like a briefcase or something like that has like SX Corp on it or something like that.
Okay.
And also in New Mutants, I'm not sure if you saw that, but
I saw the first half and then I fell asleep.
Okay, so the school they're at, it's actually like the Essex School or something like that. So it's run by, he never appears. John Hamm was supposed to play him, actually.
Interesting.
Like, he was signed on to play it, and then they changed their minds last minute. They decided not to put him in it. And then I think the plan was to bring him in the Channing Tatum Gambit movie, which never happened. But he was originally supposed to have a cameo in New Mutants as Mr. Sinister, like at the end or something, and they decided to cut that out.
Interesting. Yeah, I remember seeing, I'm like, well, that's a very particular name, and I mean, I've read a lot of stuff with Mr. Sinister in it, but it's not a character that I'm deeply invested in. It's funny because like on another episode I talked about like the big box of 80s Marvel comics that my cousin had that I dug into. Right. There's a lot of great X-Men in there of the Claremont run, and it was, I guess, Inferno and the adjacent areas, so a lot of the Outback X-Men and Mark Silvestri art, which I just love. And so that's who I associate with Mr. Sinister, who I see. And that was a character that was like, at that time, I know plans changed, or at least didn't get to be
changed
born out.
Radically.
Yeah. So he's a weird, like, it's one of these characters that for the longest time seemed like he may not even be a mutant. And so it's a weird thing that he's even involved here, in this, that he's so important. And it's interesting, even, I mean, I know that Deadpool in the comics also is not a mutant. And so it's interesting that, having not seen the first movie, how he's even involved with the X-Men this much in the movie. And I think another version that we saw a piece of in this was, I like the idea of a superhero comedy based around a team of people trying to just do good superhero business, and then a fuck up, like, trickster type like him. Maybe that's even trying really hard to do a good job, but just only knows how to do it his way. Because the thing, when they first encounter Rusty and Colossus and Negasonic Teenage Warhead and like the little version of the team that they have are trying to do a superhero thing, and he's just not getting it right. I'm like, I could have more of this.
I think that's why I love the X-Force sequence was so perfect because of that. Because he goes all the trouble, he assembles this team, and it's just clear that he's got no clue what he's doing because they all die 5 minutes in.
And I appreciated how expedient it was too. Like they just were like, oh, we're gonna put together a team. Here are the guys, and then here's the thing, and we just get like the speed with which we got through everything really helped. Like, I mean, that's probably the comedy of it is the timing, but like I was very pleased with like, oh, I don't have to, if I'm not digging something, I can just probably wait and get to the next part. But that was one of my favorite things, was getting to see him up against people who take it seriously. Because, and I think for me, he worked best, or he works best as a character, my limited experience, against other people. And that are like that, and him not being the featured solo guy. And obviously they've surrounded him with many characters in this, so he's really just on his own.
It really depends on it. In the comics, at least, it's depended a lot on the writer, because the Joe Kelly stuff, it was mostly solo. Like every now and then you'd have some characters. You have Siren in there. You'd have a few other from time to time, but mostly it was Deadpool driving himself. And when Joe Kelly was writing it, it was great. When Gail Simone was writing it, it was great. When a lot of other people have written it, it's been not very good. And but when Fabian Nicieza did it with Cable and Deadpool, it was great because of that reason, because he had him playing off of Cable, which when I'd heard that title announcement, I thought that sounds like a stupid idea. And then you read it, and it turns out to be a really good idea.
Well, because you have a straight man and the Joker, basically.
Right.
Well, in the comics, I think, at least, I read the one issue of the Joe Kelly run, but, you have captions at your disposal, which is still, even though VO can cover that, it's actually, they're still very, very different, because you can be much more playful in a different way with captions, and captions can be less annoying or less jarring than it's like straight up voiceover narration. And so even though there's some of that in the movie, you have all the panels are being narrated and commented on internally with this internal monologue that you don't have to have other people around, because your character's interacting with you. You're the other person almost in that way as a reader, versus in the movie, if you're reliant mostly on, there's some VO stuff, and it doesn't really, I think those are the moments that I work in sound, and so I notice these types of things, but times where I can, and I could be wrong too, times where I believe that they have gone back and replaced dialogue or added narration perhaps to glue together things, those are the places where they lose me the most, honestly, because it just feels disjointed from either the person on screen.
I think there's also a lot of that in this movie too, just because to make it into a PG-13 rating. Yeah. And I think that's been a lot of it, because I'm watching it and I'm noticing the lines, and I've seen the extended cut so many times that I know a lot very well. So I'm watching, and I'm like, okay, that is definitely a new line. That has definitely been re-recorded, because there was no way they could have edited that out with this shot and everything like that. So if you compare the two of them back to back, you can tell where stuff was re-recorded. And I think that's also one of the reasons why I find myself, that's why I asked you if you thought the Fred Savage stuff was funnier than the Deadpool's 2 stuff, because when I watch this, I just fast forward through the Deadpool's 2 stuff and I focus on the Fred Savage. So I'm wondering how much, I'd be really curious, like we've already talked about on the show, but just in general, I'd be really curious to see what you thought of it after watching like the full uncut version of Deadpool 2.
Yeah. I would be interested to see it just even as an experiment, because in film editing, because of all those things that go into it, where it's like, well, now that we had to cut this part out, this thing later either doesn't make sense or the timing feels wrong, so now we have to change that too. It's like you're trying to, it's like a weird quilt of things, or it's like a timeline, basically. It's like, if I change the past, I have to adjust something in the future when you're dealing with that. I would be interested to see it for at least those reasons.
Yeah, because a lot of the humor, and I'm not sure how much you like this kind of humor too, that could also have an influence on it, but a lot of the humor that works really well in the R-rated movies it's very crass, it's very vulgar type humor, and I think that's and in a lot of ways, I'm still a 13-year-old kid at heart, so I find a lot of that stuff funny. So it depends on if you like that flavor of humor as well, I think would be a big part of it. So, but when you take that kind of humor and you try to sanitize it, it's just like, watching it on TBS or something, right?
Sure.
It doesn't land the same way. Like if you watch American Pie on like TBS, it's probably not going to be funny at all, because most of the humor in that movie comes from how crass it is.
And there are certain movies that you're like, why did you even don't do this? This is not even the same movie anymore. Well, I'd be interested to see it, because I certainly have no issue with crassness. I mean, that's the thing. It's like, at the end of the day, some of the things that I would complain about in a comedy, let's say one like this, or Deadpool 2, the actual one, it's like, oh no, I want to hear the dick jokes. I want to hear the fist up the ass joke. That's all fine. I don't, just that it exists and says those things is not funny for me. There's more to it than that for me.
Right.
And I think I think a thing that was missing from, or I say missing, there's nothing wrong with what's there. I think things that I like, when I say character based, I guess I mean interactions and seeing weird people interact with each other. That's one of my, that's where a lot of comedy comes out for me. And because not everybody in the movie, but a lot of people, let's say if you take TJ Miller's character, Weasel, and Deadpool, they have similar ways of delivering lines.
Right.
Most of the stuff is like flat and matter of fact and a little sarcastic, but it is like we're just delivering funny things to each other and we're not going to make a big deal out of it. But that also draws attention to it because I'm going to say something ridiculous in a normal way, and it gets really samey, and I don't feel like I have an idea of the person's character, and therefore it's two people throwing jokes at each other versus, you know, you put like, I mean, the Deadpool and Colossus are a good that's a funny thrown together thing because you have a Colossus that honestly in my mind could be even sweeter and warmer because that's how I think of Peter. Like that's a fun throw together because it is two very different mindsets and ways of interacting with the world that highlight the funny things about each other, the goody two shoes and that won't give up on this other person. That's a very funny thing. So I mean that's just a personal preference thing, but like, and if dick jokes come out of that, that's great. I love it. Yeah. Take it to the limit. But that's the thing that I felt like was limiting. I'm like, most the characters that aren't working for me or the moments that aren't working for me often aren't because they're not based in even a thin layer of, in my mind, a thin layer of reality, of emotional reality between these people. And again, that is difficult to do in a movie where the layer between the audience and the character and the knowledge of it being a film is constantly ripping and being repaired all the time.
Yeah.
You know, so that's difficult to do. And the emotional moments, not just with Rusty, but even with Vanessa, in the kind of the afterlife thing that they keep doing. I liked that effect where it's kind of like you go underwater and you pierce this veil of it looks like a Doctor Strange effect almost. And the moment that they share when he thinks he's died or he has died at the end, and he sees her and he actually it doesn't have his burns or anything anymore. Like I cared about these two characters, so I don't even have a horse in this race or a dog in the race or whatever. Like I've not seen the first movie, but I'm like, well, their interaction, this is just good acting and they do have chemistry and I do care about this. So kudos to them for that. Cause I don't even have a history with these characters.
Yeah. One of the things that's really interesting about Ryan Reynolds, and I made a comment about this when we talked about Deadpool 2, is when I think about him and I think about, all the movies I've seen him in, I can't think of a time when he has not had good chemistry with his co-stars. Like he's just a guy who seems to get along and work well with everybody. Like you see him in this, like the chemistry between him and Marina Baccarin, chemistry between him and Josh Brolin or Zazie Beetz or TJ Miller to an extent, but even like in other stuff, like recently I'd seen my wife was watching The Proposal the other night with Sandra Bullock. That's another one. They've got great chemistry together. Or Definitely Maybe, this movie he did with Dakota Fanning, I think it was back in the, like almost 20 years ago now. Like another one where it's just like he's got great chemistry with just like this little girl, and he works so well with all these different actors, and it really makes these relationships work so much better in these movies. Like even in like him with Shioli Katsuna in this, right? Yukio, right? Their cute little relationship. And even though Ryan Reynolds is, and one of the criticisms of him is that he's always basically just playing himself in a lot of these movies. But I think that's why the relationships that he has feel so real, because it feels like a different relationship with each person. Like the way he interacts with Yukio is very different from the way he interacts with, NTW, and even and with similar types of characters. Like you've also got Colossus and Cable, who are both the straight man type, but he interacts very differently with both of them.
Well, yeah, when you're inhabiting a character that you're basically living in the world, but your character persona is very close to who you are, you don't have to put much thought into how you would react to a person.
Right.
I mean, and acting is not thinking. That's not really what you're supposed to do. But it would be maybe more of a challenge, or you would have to really get into the mindset and the skin of a different person who's very different from you to get to those more natural reactions of different people, because that is the facets of who we are when we are with who we're with. That's what makes us people. It's like, hey, I'm different on on mic than I am with my dog, or
right, yeah.
All these things are. Yeah, and that's the thing is he definitely, and I've seen him in Waiting. I've seen clips of him in Blade 3 or whatever.
Yeah, that was probably the only one. And that wasn't even because of him. It was just because that was a shit situation for everybody.
And then in this now, and then interviews and stuff, like he has a lot of charisma, and he has at least on-screen confidence. I know that I was reading that he deals with anxiety and stuff, and that's part of why he likes the Deadpool persona, because he's behind a mask and he can kind of be himself, but be projected onto something else. But he's a movie star, and there are movie stars that are also great actors, like that can portray all kinds of different characters, and you believe them. But they're also just people who we want to see on screen, and they just hold our attention and our focus, and we emote and we follow them across the screen, even in some cases where they're not particularly great actors. I mean, Arnold Schwarzenegger is not a known good actor. That's not how we portray him. But I've found him, compelling in movies just as a person to watch on screen. And that's an old example. I mean, Tom Cruise is an easy one, not to put down his acting, but he's usually pretty Tom Cruise-y.
I think it's Tom Cruise, and also George Clooney I'd put in this category too, where they're good actors. They can act when they want to, but a lot of times they just want to do, they're put into these roles where we just want to see, we just like Tom Cruise, we just like George Clooney, so that's just what we want to see. But like you see him, like Tom Cruise in Collateral, like he was amazing in that.
Accurate,
or even in Tropic Thunder, right? I mean, he's
right.
Or George Clooney in Syriana, right? So they've got the acting chops, but it's just everybody wants to see them do like Maverick or Danny Ocean.
Right, and when they are, let's say, this heightened version of themselves, or their movie star self, there's something about them innately that we don't need them to even put on a show. We don't need them to turn into someone else to hold our attention. Whereas a character actor, let's say, I mean, I'm drawing distinctions. These are not technical things, but we have actors out there that are often very close to themselves on screen, but we just like that. That's all we want from them. That's the meat and potatoes that we want from them, versus a character actor who plays like 1,000 different characters the whole life, and we're impressed by that.
They're like someone like Gary Oldman, who you don't even realize it's Gary Oldman in half the movies.
Yeah, and maybe he never went for it, but maybe a version of him on screen we also would have fallen for in that way and followed through, but that's not where his skills or his interests lay, I guess. But that's I think what you have with Ryan Reynolds, and mileage varies. Like, I'm not as drawn to him just doing normal stuff, I guess, as maybe some are, but there's no denying that like he has something going on there, that is like, I'm watching him do things that I'm not even as so interested in, or making jokes that I'm not digging as much, but I'm like, well, I want to see what happens. And I'm consistently, I said it before, kind of in some ways impressed that his take on the character doesn't involve a bunch of mugging, or and at times maybe I wanted more out of him. Maybe I wanted him to be a little more dynamic, but you could make this character a different kind of annoying, a very in-your-face kind of annoying, that would not work as the protagonist of multiple movies over 4 hours or whatever. And he didn't go for that. And in the moments when he modulates to a more real emotional state, like with Vanessa, that means that going there doesn't feel like such a knee-jerk pull to the left of the road sort of thing. So yeah, I not. It's funny how aware of him I am, and then realizing, I've barely ever seen this guy do his job on screen. I've seen him interviewed more than anything else.
It'll be interesting to see what happens when Marvel ends up making Deadpool 3, because they own it now. It's going to be in the Marvel universe, they said, and that's a much bigger. Going back to what you said about you wanted it to be like more colorful. It'll be interesting to see what they do with it, because I mean, honestly, as great as David Leitch did with this one, I kind of want to see like Taika Waititi direct the next one. I mean, especially after seeing the two of them. I'm not sure. Did you see Free Guy?
No, I didn't.
Okay, so the two of them in Free Guy, they were great in that movie, just because like both of them were allowed to just like really kind of push things, and that's like this big colorful world they created in that movie. And so I mean, like seeing Taika Waititi direct a Deadpool movie and maybe even star in it, and because people forget they were in Green Lantern together too. They had pretty good chemistry in that.
That's right. Oh yeah, I mean, it's someone something, yes, I think visually, well, a lot of things, like when I read that was what was going to happen, I was like, okay, I am interested in seeing that, because regardless of how much the humor stays the same, or the little things that I'm not digging, the things that they would get to lampoon, and the ways that they would get to interact, I've been invested in the MCU. I've seen a lot of this stuff, so now if there's so much there to play with and joke about, and so many big ideas at this point. I mean, we've got Celestials now and all these things that they can, and things that haven't worked as well, and that I mean, I'm sure the Inhumans would be on the chopping block as far as things that we get to make fun of. So there's a lot that you could really, like, throwing him into a 4-color world, because it does seem like Marvel is slowly pushing into that. Away from the Fox-ish. I mean, Iron Man, if you watch Iron Man, it is still more cartoony than 2008's Iron Man.
Right.
It's more cartoony than the X-Men, but it is more grounded.
It's much more grounded. Yeah. Like, and then if you look at
Kirby,
you look at something like, the previews for Love and Thunder, which we're about, 2 weeks away from. Like, it's night and day differences between the two.
Hyper stylized, and some of that's a change in just what in tastes of the public as well, and how films are being made. And then of course Marvel, just moving into concepts that require that kind of thing. I mean, I, not to relitigate Eternals, because you've already covered that on the podcast, but that is a concept that I think would be maybe better served, having seen the dramatic, take it seriously version, maybe a wilder, more fun version, that's closer to Kirby on screen. Maybe that would be more fun if this concept even works for the Marvel universe.
Right.
And when you get into things that big and that, like space magic, basically, this stuff, I think the light approach, the half serious, half not approach, and the stylized thing works. So I would love to see.
I think that's why Ragnarok worked so well and why Eternals didn't. I think because Ragnarok basically just kind of embraced the fact that, hey, this is a lot of crazy bullshit, and we're just going to lean into that. And whereas Eternals kept trying to do it reminded me a lot of a Zack Snyder movie in that way, in the DC movies, because it's like we're going to take all this like space magic stuff and we're trying to ground it in the real world. And like, those two things don't really work. You're talking about space magic. It literally should not be grounded.
Yeah. Well, and also setting it explicitly in a world where we've already got all these other things going on. I mean, not to say that you can't mix them up, but if it had been a one-off project that was set in its own world, I might approach it differently with a different mindset than thinking, oh, but you're also in the world of Captain America and this thing and this thing and this thing. I'm looking for. Well, also, I think there's a feeling, and I don't mean to apply intent to the director of Eternals, because I don't think this was her intent, but the feeling versus, let's say, Ragnarok. Ragnarok basically feels like this is how it's always been. Comics are crazy. There's no apology here. We're having fun at its expense sometimes, but it's almost like, oh yeah, this party has been going on in the background the whole time. That's how they treat a lot of the space stuff. Eternals felt like, guys, we promise this is serious adult stuff. Don't run away. It's going to be complicated, but you're going to like it. And that it felt apologetic almost in a way for its crazy ideas. In its tone and everything, like, please take this seriously. This is serious stuff. So I think that, I'm enjoying and certainly the trailer for Love and Thunder. I'm like, yeah, give me Russell Crowe as a big fat Zeus and blowing by. I mean, it's all the more fun for it.
Yeah. One of the things I like about what Once Upon a Deadpool did too is just like how willing they were to just kind of make fun of themselves with this. Like, I mean, Fred Savage is merciless in his criticism.
Yeah. It's the meta stuff worked for me, and especially more, I guess, in the Fred Savage scenes. That stuff was good. It worked for me, and it felt like, I mean, some of it's inside baseball, but I don't know what it was that worked for. I mean, maybe it's because I'm coming from a background of knowing about this.
I think it's thing like, it's so inside baseball, right? These jokes are so inside, which is why I keep saying, like, I don't think Fox really knew what they had here, because I think they were just like, we want to do a PG-13 version of Deadpool 2, and Ryan Reynolds said to him, okay, we'll do a PG-13 version of Deadpool 2, but you have to give us some money to do some extra scenes.
Yeah.
And I think they kind of just did this Fred Savage stuff without anyone at Fox really knowing about it. And then they got it, and they're like, okay, well, we're like 2 weeks away from deadline. I guess we got to put this out there now.
Right. That's funny. Well, yeah, and it's so I mean, there's a number of jokes like that, even outside of the Fred Savage stuff, like the X-Men being behind the closed door or closing the door slowly so that Deadpool doesn't see them. That was very unexpected and very funny. I think it's that they were shooting. Were they shooting Dark Phoenix?
They were shooting Dark Phoenix at the same time. Yeah, so they had filmed the two different separately, and they just kind of like green screened it in.
Yeah, but that was awesome because you actually are using the toys, the actual, not just talking about it, but you actually get to use.
Right, and you're giving a little joke, like they're there, they just don't want to see Deadpool.
They don't want to interact with this shit. Yeah, Colossus is the only one nice enough to interact with you on this level. Like he's and you know, I didn't look. I don't know. I guess given his role in the movie, it was just right. But like, I love Colossus so much. He just in my heart is such a lovable character that I was like, oh, I just want him to be even sweeter, even warmer, and I want to see him featured more. So hopefully in the future, someday we'll just get.
You should also check out the first Deadpool movie because there's some more stuff with him in there as well. Yeah.
Well, he looked really. It's funny. I'm of two minds of how he looks. On one hand, he does look really great. Like he looks like a statue come to life.
Right.
But and maybe that's what it would look like. Who knows if that's what it would look like if a person turned into organic metal. But also, it made him less human in those. And I guess because did we ever see him as a human?
No, he doesn't. Okay. Yeah. I think part of the reasons too is because they had two different actors playing him. You had the guy who was doing the CGI motion capture, and then you had Stefan Kapisik who was doing the voice acting.
That's right. Oh, and that's pretty common for these things. So that would make sense. But I really love that character in the comics. So, and I have my own, in my head how he should be, and he was very close to that. But I wanted more of him. But like some of the other, I'm trying to think of what some of the I liked them in the jail. I was hoping for in the prison, I guess. I was hoping for like something where a lot of the collars came off, and we got like even a moment of just like free for all mutant prison break where everybody's throwing powers around. Like I really thought we were going for that, and I know that's a big budget thing. Probably it was still a great sequence.
Right.
It was still really good. But I'm trying to think of the stuff that I was particular. Oh. There was a joke early on. It was so dumb, but it reminds me of old Simpsons stuff where it's like something in the background that like I did pause and go back. Where Deadpool goes to, is it Blind Al? Is that her name?
Yeah.
Okay. He goes to her house or her apartment and is trying to like quietly get guns and cocaine out of something in her floor.
Oh, that was a joke from the first movie because he makes this comment when he's leaving and he's about to go, to the final battle, which he's likely going to die in. And he tells Al, he's like, there's a whole lot of cocaine buried in the house right next to the cure for blindness. And you think he's just making a joke, and they have it in this movie.
There you go. Well, so the thing, not seeing that, it felt like just a funny, not a non sequitur, but like a blink and you'll miss it type of background joke where he's feeling around in the floor looking for that. And you just see the cure for blindness written on something. And that was so just blunt and basic. I really thought it was fun. But the stuff at the end with the time travel stuff, that was really funny. All the and the thing I had already known because I remember reading at the time, like, oh, the incredible, post-credit sequence, so funny. And I'd read about it, so it wasn't a surprise. But I did laugh out loud at the Green Lantern script just because he goes like, "You made it, buddy." He's reading and then he just gets shot from behind and.
There's an extended the uncut version has an extended version of it. Ryan Reynolds has like a hole in his head and everything. And he even has this kind of conversation with Hugh Jackman when he goes back to kill himself in X-Men Origins.
Well, and that I haven't seen that. I knew that he was in it and that it was not what anyone wanted at the time. But like I was like, oh shit, who's this guy without a mouth?
Oh god,
there's
been
a lot
terrible.
of that going around between Black Bolt and then like on thinking of the Matrix and everything. We really loved that effect. But yeah, I liked that too because I'm like, yeah, we're just gonna make fun of everything ourselves and everybody like that. That attitude I'm on board for, and I thought those were all very funny, funny things.
Yeah, you should definitely check out the extended version, if only else for the time travel sequence at the end because also they've got a few other sequences that they cut out of here. One is the opening sequence. They had this huge globe-trotting sequence where he's traveling around the world as a mercenary, as an assassin, set to 9 to 5 by Dolly Parton.
Yeah, that's funny.
And also like they've got this whole like James Bond style opening credit sequence in the original one with Celine Dion doing the song for it.
Oh wow.
So yeah, and the opening credits in the original one, like they play around with how they credit people in the opening credits in both the original Deadpool 2 and in the first Deadpool as well. Like they don't put down the characters, actors, or the directors' names or anything, but they find like, you know, funny little titles for it. It's worth watching for just like those little things. It's worth watching it. So I think if you like the Deadpool 2 stuff in this, then I think you'd enjoy it a lot more if you watch the original two movies.
Yeah. I can see that.
But yeah, I think this one, it's, you know, I love and a lot of people, first I gotta say, like, I love the fact that this is a blatant cash grab. Everybody knows it, but they still managed to give us something that's like, okay, yeah, I get what you're doing. I know you're just trying to get my money, but you know what? I love seeing Fred Savage and Deadpool interact together, so I'm going to go along with it.
Well, that is maybe the best way to do. I mean, to reference The Simpsons again, for a long time, they were required by contract to do however many episodes a year. Well, I guess they still are, but they would, I think it was maybe by contract or to meet a budgetary restraint, they would have to have one clips episode every year. And that could only have minimal, like, you know, framing and recording of new lines and new animation. And whenever they did that, they managed to make fun of how they were doing. I mean, there was also that Clerks episode. Did you watch the Clerks?
Oh, yeah.
Where, and that's making
they did a
fun
flashback
of
episode in the second episode.
Yeah, and making fun of that. But that whole thing where it's like you know, you're making fun of the conceit of how you get to having these flashbacks. And so if it's like, hey, we have to make a cheap ass episode that uses old stuff, and we're going to, with any new material that we can make for it, point out the fact that this is ridiculous, or we're going to make fun of it a little bit. That is probably the best way to get me to accept that sort of thing. And
they did that really well here too. Man, that Clerks, you just reminded me, that Clerks animated series was so good and so short-lived.
There was some fun. I mean, I think there was some stuff in it that was really great, and the one thing that I think it seems like that has lived on from it is probably the one thing I think that deserves to live on, which is the whole extended anime sequence at the end of the one episode. Because like me and my friends used to say, "Oh my God, who's driving? Oh my God, Bear is driving," to each other all the time based on that, because it's such a, they didn't know how to write themselves out of the episode. They didn't know how to resolve it. So they just said Big American Dance Party and then did this whole thing. But like the animation was just it was such a spot on parody at the time of that stuff that I found it. And there's a transformer that transforms with a man inside of him, and there's a blood spurt that comes out. So that's funny stuff. But yeah, what a weird, like, who knows what it would have been if they had gotten to put it on HBO, which is where I think they wanted to put it in the first place.
Yeah. It was funny because Kevin Smith talks about that, because they said like UPN was giving them offers like, we'll let you do like as much as you want. We'll let you do like 10 seasons or whatever. Yeah. And it's like, yeah, but ABC is offering us 6 episodes and it's ABC. So I think we'll go with ABC. And that he says like, yeah, that was a mistake.
What a bad pairing. I mean, like even NBC would have been a better choice. I mean, as far as just like brand pairing, you know, like ABC is a Disney affiliate. They are not known for pushing the envelope. Yeah. And at the time, that is what he was known for. So yeah, that's funny, man. What a weird product.
But yeah, the Fred Savage, like if you're gonna watch this movie, and you had trouble tracking it down actually, so it's
a real hard time. Seems like no one. It's been CIA's been knocking it out of existence online.
I wonder how much of it, now that it's owned by Disney, and maybe they're just haven't re-released it or something like that.
Yeah, that could be it.
So, but yeah, I mean, it might also have to do something with the recent Fred Savage stuff too.
Could be. I mean, that would be surprising to me, just because, sadly, it's just that there's so many. There would be so many things that are just taken out of existence.
Right, but I think not so much that they took it out of existence because of that, but I think that it might have caused them to have cold feet about re-releasing it so soon.
Yeah, they're letting it, if there's a lapse in there, just letting that lapse happen for a while. That's
right. Because they did have because the Deadpool movies, they were still on like Hulu until recently, I think. And then now that the Hulu deal is expired, now it's completely Disney's now. And I think, so I think, and I know like Amazon Prime had them as well. So I think Amazon Prime, it's just kind of like, we're going to let that lapse for Once Upon a Deadpool at least.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and there's also the TJ Miller of it all as well.
Right. That too. That's another,
there's that aspect. And then I understand that there was not that this is in the same thing, but there was some tragedy on the set of this movie because they had a stunt woman who died while pulling off one of the stunts.
Oh, really? I didn't know
Domino, that. Yeah. Oh, and just I feel like, you know, Domino, Zazie Beetz, I enjoyed her as Domino. She's just easy to watch on screen regardless. But I really did enjoy the just digging into how her luck power works and how things are going so bad for everybody else, like how she can just have this relaxed nature about the world and walking through the world because she's like falling into a giant panda because she was blown off of a thing. Like, I wanted to see even more of those Rube Goldberg style things because they were just, it was just so almost mean spirited how well it was going for her. And because I mean, I felt like, meant to or not, you know, a lot of the time when we have these luck characters in the Marvel universe, like her, Longshot, Scarlet Witch to an extent,
Black Cat.
Usually there's a story later where, yes, there's a story where either that also creates bad luck for someone else or for them somewhere in the world, that it's like you're upsetting the balance. And I almost wonder if Domino's presence doing these things is what got every member of X-Force killed. I don't think they were thinking of that, but it felt like one of those no prize things.
That's a
like,
good point. Yeah.
Bad.
Yeah.
It was so like blatantly bad, but it's also that kind of movie.
But yeah, and you know, that was always the thing. And I mentioned this when we talked about Deadpool 2, but the whole luck is a superpower thing always seemed like such bullshit to me when you're reading comic books, because very few comics have ever actually played with that idea. It's like mostly they forget about it until they need it. And the one before Deadpool 2, the one time I think that they really showed that being used well was Grant Morrison wrote New X-Men Annual, where he had Domino guest star.
Yeah, and when Zorn first appeared.
Yeah, and he did a really good job of using luck as a superpower. Like, they jump out the window, there's a pool underneath, or there's or she's like, yeah, the combination of the safe just happened to be my ex-boyfriend's phone number.
Yeah, I know. That's the thing, is like it's in the presentation as much as what the actual ideas are because I mean, if you read early Scarlet Witch appearances where it's like, my hex powers just make things happen that shouldn't happen, you're literally a Deus Ex Machina. Like, that is, you were just the writer needing an out here. And that, you know, I've always enjoyed Longshot. He was in stuff when I was a kid, and I liked Art Adams' art, so even though he's a weird, you know, kind of also ran character, I liked that when you pair it with either a personality like his, where it's like I'm just kind of a himbo that's having a good, like, I'm just a nice innocent guy, or with Domino, well, and she wasn't a bimbo in this, but like the ease with which a person would live in the world if they had those powers, I like seeing that happen. It just it feels like a fun thing. And it's also, I like it that in her case, it felt like it, in the movie at least, it's just something that's happening. It's not even something that she is forcing into existence.
Right.
Like, I better use my power now. It's
right, exactly. It's just like she says, you know, things just work out for me. And they did a really good job of showing that. Like that convoy sequence is just amazing. Like, every time, like, you know, like I said, I fast forward through most of the movie. I did not fast forward through that scene.
No, that's all, because it is just good action, and it's funny, and it's well choreographed. Like, the way that it comes together at the end, it reminds me of almost like a Seinfeld or an improv, like a Herald, which is where the things that have been set up at the top all come together in some way, and probably a lot of scenes can fit that role. But this felt like that whole scene where she ends up on the panda and all these other bad things are happening. Yeah, it is kind of a operatic moment in its way. Yeah, I really dug that.
And also, speaking of, you know, taking things from or like fixing things the X-Men movies did, like they did with Colossus, they also did that with Juggernaut here too.
Yeah. It's funny how, like, I forgot that he was in the movie, and then when Rusty went and like knocked on the, you know, like was in the prison and was starting to interact with them, but you don't see him, I'm like, oh, that's got to be Juggernaut. Like, that's who we're dealing with. And it's certainly not bad. It's cool to see him throw down with Colossus. Like, I guess the Juggernaut often, if you're not giving him a good character, you know, deep dive, then all you can really do is he's just a force of nature that you release on the thing. So it was cool to see him doing Juggernaut stuff, I guess. I do like it when he's an asshole, and I don't mean the way that he was in Days of, or whatever,
Last Stand.
I that was not, I mean, I'm fine with him being a jerk. I think that's part of, he is a bully. I mean, the perfect bully. But like, him just kind of getting to do this thing here was like, okay, cool. It's cool that he's here.
Yeah.
You know, and they throw us down with Colossus.
And there's a lot more. Because Ryan Reynolds did the voice for
I'd seen that.
And he's got some extra jokes in the extended version. Like even one where they go to a store to get some new clothes and they had nothing for Juggernaut.
Yeah, it's good. It's funny how Juggernaut, like, in other media, certainly like in the movies, we all just accept that it makes a lot more sense for him to not be Mystic and just be a mutant. Although it also sets up the issue of, So Charles Xavier's stepbrother also happens to be a mutant. Like, it's not his biological, unless they change that in something, but it's like, if you change it to be more realistic, quote unquote, to make him a mutant, it's simpler and cleaner, but you're also creating so wait, these two people who aren't related and then their parents just got together, they both happen to be mutants. It takes that away again. Yeah. In a weird way.
Which is why, so if you're doing it, I think when they bring it into the MCU, you could actually do the Mystic thing, because now they've got that background for it.
You could.
But in these movies, it makes more sense for him to just be a mutant.
And I would argue just make him his brother. I mean, this is litigating something that doesn't have to be, but I'm like, let's just simplify a little bit here. Like, because Stan Lee or whoever threw this out at that moment in 1969 or something, like, maybe we can clean it up a little bit 40, 50, 60 years later. Right. Simplify.
Okay. But I think that's really all I wanted to really say about Once Upon a Deadpool. I think the main draw for me is still the Fred Savage stuff. And like, I just love the scenes, especially at the beginning when they have got like these extended sequences of the two of them, are really what my favorite parts about it. And then when we see things like the I want to fight Matt Damon thing.
Yeah, that was fun.
And and also Deadpool's line about how, Matt Damon, he's like, how'd you get these guys in this movie? He's like, same way I got you in. He's like Matt Damon, Brad Pitt, and Celine Dion are locked up in my basement still.
Right. Well, it's funny because now I know that Brad Pitt makes that, very, very brief appearance as, was it Vanisher or was it? Yeah. So that ultimately paid off in a way. I'm like, oh, that's what he was talking about. But the Celine Dion, I guess because she's not in this version, I'm like, oh, that's just a funny reference to a person.
There is, she did I think the song plays over the credits, but the end credits, but it's the main credits in the original version. And there's also, she even shot a music video for it with Deadpool. Fun. Yeah. It's worth watching that too.
There's totally last thing. It's so small, but I always like it when this is always funny to me. When you have the semi-operatic scoring that goes with like a dramatic, like a big fight, and it's like, and they have the moment with the Juggernaut where I don't know what they're saying, but they're like, Juggernaut, like they just
it's great
things on screen.
They say like you can't stop him. He's the Juggernaut. Yeah,
that was fun.
And the operatic ones by here, because they're like saying, oh, holy shit balls.
There you go. See, I couldn't hear every aspect of it, but I was like, okay, I like it when you can play with that stuff. That's good.
Yeah, that was I'm glad they kept that in too, because I was worried that they would edited that down, but I guess you're okay with saying shit now in PG-13 as much as you want.
Yeah, you get so many of them, I guess. I mean, it's so funny and stupid how that whole thing gets figured. Yeah. There was a documentary a while ago that I watched that was really interesting, and I don't even remember the name. But
are you talking about This Film Is Not Yet Rated?
That's the one.
Yeah, that was a great movie.
It goes into all that stuff where it's like, this is like a lot of these institutions, big and small, a lot of horse shit, and a lot of people who shouldn't be in charge of these things making decisions for lots of other people.
Yeah. Well, I think they mentioned, I'm not sure if they said it in this movie but they said like, it's still like in the UK, it's the same rating as Deadpool 2.
Yeah, of course. Well, and it also makes sense on one hand. Why? Because it's like, well, I don't know everything that was cut out, but it's like, what is maybe more, not even damaging, but like, what might you want to limit your children's exposure to? Jokes about sexual abuse or a fist up the ass joke or something like I don't maybe both maybe no whatever, but it's like certain things being or a naked breast or people punching through each other and getting shot. It's really down to the individual.
Well, to show you one of them, like the scene at the end where Colossus grabs the wire and he shoves it into Juggernaut.
Yeah.
In the original one, he pulls down his pants and shoves it up his ass. But I guess like a CGI ass is taking things too far.
There are things that you just can't do. There was a guy talking about there's a show called Love on Netflix, and we for a while were having more movies where like dicks are on screen. We're just that's part of the humor now, and we're kind of pushing it. It's like, let's show less women and just push those out there. And he said, well, we need to have a scene where we have an erect penis on screen. That's going to push even further. And Netflix was like, that just makes it porn. You can't do that. If that happens, it's like the same body part in a different state of blood letting or whatever. It's like that turns it into X-rated, and you just can't do that. No, not going to happen. It's so.
Well, also, in This Film Was Not Yet Rated, I think Maria Bello, she was talking about her scene in one of these movies she did where she does a sex scene. She has an orgasm, and they objected to it because the censors objected to it because she has an orgasm.
Yeah, it's so, I mean, it's, I guess because it's like, no, a love scene of just two pretty people just rubbing against each other in a general sense and hugging and kissing, we can deal with that. But if you bring the orgasm into it,
but it's specifically the female
aspect,
orgasm.
well,
it's specifically
exactly.
the female one. Yeah.
Yeah, there's the misogynist thing, but it's like if people are coming, then it's like we got a whole different ballpark here, even if you just see faces.
Yeah.
And man,
there's also Kevin Bacon did a video on YouTube where he's like challenging people to have show more dicks on screen.
Go for it.
And he had this one. He's like, "Hey Marvel, I got a villain for you." He's like, "I've got an Infinity Stone on my cock."
Well, there's a show I would suggest on HBO Max called Minx. That's a lot of fun. It's mostly comedy, but there's like they if there's a dick budget for them, they spent it in the first episode. Like there was like 12 or 15 or whatever. But it's aside from all that, also it's cool they did that. It's just a fun show, but they are pushing for more dicks on screens, as we all should be.
Yeah, that's a good note to end it on.
Yeah, I was gonna say that's the end. That's the button.
Okay, well, you want to tell people where they can find you?
Yeah, I am at Will Short. Haha, is that right?
Yes, I think that's right. Yeah.
Okay, at Will Short Haha on Twitter. But the main thing you should check out is Days Past Tooncast. That is a podcast that I co-host. We have adult conversations about yesterday's animations, meaning old cartoons, usually Saturday morning types. We have adult conversations about them. That means cussing, the kind of things you might see in a Deadpool movie. And you can find us just about anywhere you would find podcasts. If you want to find us online, you can go to dptooncast.com, and dptooncast is also our social media handle.
Okay, great. And if you're a Patreon subscriber, you can also listen to the companion podcast for this, and where Will has been our first guest on that. He came on to talk about Avengers Under Siege. Although by the time you listen to this episode, that's been like months ago. So
yeah, right.
I'm so far ahead of the schedule with the regular show, and like I've got like nothing scheduled for the Patreon show. Yeah. So I got to get on that. All right. But yeah, superheroceinephiles.com is our website. Super Cinema Pod on Twitter and Instagram. And again, you sign up for the Patreon show, you get the companion book club podcast, and you also get these episodes a week in advance. Thanks so much for listening, and we'll talk to you next time. If you enjoy the Superhero Cinephiles, then you'll also love my companion podcast, the Superhero Cinephiles Book Club. All my Patreon subscribers get access to this exclusive podcast where I review superhero comics and graphic novels. Not sure what comics you want to read next or what you should dive into? I've got you covered on that. I'll be doing reviews, recommendations, and also talking to you about useful entry points if you're interested in reading some comics but don't know where you should start. Plus, you'll get access to all episodes of the main show a week before everyone else. On all of this for as little as just $1 a month. All you have to do is go to patreon.com/supercinemapod, and you can sign up at any subscription amount to get started. Thanks so much for your support, and please don't forget to rate and review us on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts.
Thank you for listening. And as always, good night, good evening. God bless.